The go. The blizzard sweeping through Sheridan County, Wyoming, that year was unlike anything Caleb Walker had seen in a decade of living off the grid. The afternoon sky, once a heavy leaden gray, suddenly collapsed, unleashing a whiteout of furious gales. Wind howled through the crags of the Bighorn Mountains, sounding like the screams of lost souls. Caleb gripped the reins tight, his rugged leather boots sinking deep into the knee-high snow. He was trying to wrangle the last horse, a wild Mustang named Aries, into the reinforced barn before their vision was completely swallowed by the white death. His breath came out in thick plumes, crystallizing into frost on his heavy beard. Years of ranch work had forged his body into cold steel, but this 20-below chill was clawing its way into his bones, a brutal reminder of man's insignificance against Mother Nature. Just as he bolted the stable door, a strange sound tore through the whistling wind. It wasn't thunder. It was the violent screech of metal slamming against boulders, followed by a deafening explosion echoing from Black Canyon about half a mile away. Caleb froze. The instincts of a combat veteran who had served in the shitholes of the Middle East kicked in. He knew that sound. A vehicle had just gone over the edge. "Damn it," Caleb muttered. In this weather, leaving the house was suicide, but leaving someone to burn or freeze to death in that canyon wasn't in his DNA. He bolted into the kitchen, grabbed a high-powered tactical light, a coil of climbing rope, and his multi-tool axe. Without a second thought, he swung onto Aries' back and urged the horse straight into the blinding salt spray of the storm. The trail to Black Canyon was now just a fading memory under the drifts. As he reached the rim, his flashlight swept over a dark gash in the white shattered windshield glass and an oil slick. 30 feet down the ravine, a black SUV lay overturned, gray smoke billowing out despite the heavy snowfall. Caleb rappelled down the rope with deadly precision. Inside the wreck, a figure lay unconscious, pinned between the deployed airbags and the driver's seat. It was a woman. She was wearing an elegant silk evening gown, looking completely out of place in this wilderness. Caleb smashed the window, cut the seatbelt, and pulled her free. Even in a semi-conscious state, the woman used her last bit of strength to clutch a small crossbody bag to her chest. When Caleb went to lift her to carry her up the tiff side, she suddenly bolted awake, her eyes wide with pure terror. She didn't cry for help. She fought him, her nails clawing at his leather duster like a cornered animal. "Let go. Don't touch me." Her voice was weak and ragged, but dripping with defiance. "I'm saving your life," Caleb growled, his voice booming over the wind. "If you want to die, wait until I get you out of this god-forsaken hole." He ignored her resistance and lashed her to his back with the rope. She was a light load, but the tremors shivering through her body told Caleb that the Retha was closing in. As they reached the top, the vehicle below exploded, throwing a fireball into the gray sky. The woman shuddered, her head lolling onto his shoulder as she passed out. Back at the cabin, Caleb laid her on the sofa by the fireplace. He realized she was in the throes of severe hypothermia. Her lips were blue, and her porcelain skin was as pale as wax. "Listen," Caleb said as she opened her eyes again, a smoky gray gaze scanning the room with hair-trigger alertness. "You need to get out of those soaked clothes. I'm leaving dry gear here and turning my back. You've got 5 minutes before your lungs freeze over." He set a pair of heavy flannels on the table and walked to the window. Elena, the name on the ID he'd glimpsed when her wallet fell out, didn't say a word. Caleb heard the rustle of silk, groans of pain, and the crackle of the fire. She didn't trust him for a second. He could feel her eyes burning into his back, watching his every move. 5 minutes later, Caleb turned around. She was swamped in his oversized clothes, huddled under a thick wool blanket, but her hands were still white-knuckled around that small bag beneath the covers. "I'm Caleb Walker. This is my ranch," he said, handing her a mug of hot coffee. She took the mug, but didn't drink. She studied him, the bearded man with the faint scar on his cheek and hands tough as nails. "Why are you out here, in the middle of nowhere?" "I should be asking you that, miss." "Moriarty," Caleb countered, intentionally using her last name to test the waters. Elena stiffened, her eyes narrowing. "You know who I am? Your ID fell out back there." You're Thomas Sterling's fiancé. Everyone in Wyoming knows that guy's about to marry some New York socialite to grease the wheels of his mining empire. Elena gripped the coffee mug, the steam blurring her face. She didn't confirm or deny it. The silence between them was heavy. She didn't mention the scan, the hard drive, or why she had driven off the cliff. She just stared at the hearth, her lips sealed like a secret that would never see the light of day. The silence broke when Aries whinnied an alarm from the barn. Caleb stood up instantly and cuffed the lights. The room plunged into darkness, lit only by the dull red glow of the embers. Through the window, the headlights of two pickups swept through the snow, heading straight for the ranch gate. "They're here," Elena whispered, her voice laced with a gut-wrenching horror. She snatched a paring knife off the table, looking more ready to end it herself than be taken. Caleb looked at her, then at the uninvited guests. He stepped close to her, lowering his voice. "If you want to live, get in the crawl space under the floorboards. Don't ask questions. And no matter what you hear, even gunshots, don't come out until I call you." Elena looked deep into Caleb's eyes. She had no choice but to bet her life on this stranger. As he closed the hatch, she still gripped the small bag, the thing that held evidence to topple an empire, the thing she'd rather die than hand over. Caleb stood up, donning the cold-blooded mask of a soldier. He grabbed his Winchester, opened the door, and stepped onto the porch. 3 men in Sterling Corps security uniforms stood there, guns drawn. "Walker, hand over the girl!" the leader shouted, a scar-faced thug Caleb recognized as a dirty ex-cop. "She's a fugitive who stole corporate property." Caleb smirked, a smile that held no warmth. "On my land, the only ones with the right to demand anything are God or a judge with a warrant. You're neither. Don't let this get bloody, Caleb. You're just a washed-up horse rancher. And you're standing in the crosshairs of a rancher who hasn't missed a shot at this range since he was a kid," Caleb said, slowly flicking the safety off. The metallic click rang out sharp against the howling wind. The standoff lasted minutes. Finally, the scarred leader saw the lethal resolve in Caleb's eyes. He retreated, seething. "We'll be back with a warrant. And when we do, you'll be begging for a jail cell." As the engine noise faded, Caleb went inside and opened the hatch. Elena climbed out, hair disheveled and face pale, but the wild look in her eyes had softened. She looked at him, then at the rifle in his hand. For the first time, she lowered the knife. "He won't stop," she said, still keeping her distance. "You just signed your own death warrant for a complete stranger." Caleb stowed the gun and turned to stoke the fire. "I didn't help you because I know who you are. I helped you because I hate people who think they own other folks' lives in this country." He handed her a plate of hardtack and bread. "You'll need your strength to run tomorrow morning, or to fight beside me if you choose to stay. But for now, keep your secrets, miss. Moresi, I don't want to hear 'em until I'm sure you won't use 'em to stab me in the back." Elena looked at the bread, then at the man calmly cleaning up the storm's mess. A strange, flickering warmth stirred in her mind. Amidst the blizzard and the manhunt, Caleb Walker's cold exterior was the warmest thing she had ever known. The dim Wyoming dawn offered no warmth. It was merely a sliver of silver gray piercing through the thick frost on the window pane, illuminating a cabin cluttered with the debris of the night before. Caleb woke in his battered leather armchair, the Winchester still resting across his thighs. He hadn't truly slept. A scout's instincts were hardwired into his marrow, turning every floorboard creak or wind gust into an active threat. Elena remained huddled on the bed, buried under a mountain of heavy wool blankets. Her breathing had leveled out, losing the ragged, frantic edge of the cold shakes. Caleb stood up, his joints popping like dry twigs. He strode to the hearth, stoked the dying embers, and fed the fire a few heavy logs of oak. As the flames caught, he turned to find Elena awake. She didn't move, just lay there watching him. Her gaze was still guarded, but the raw hostility from the night before had softened into a quiet curiosity. She watched his scarred hands as he prepped the coffee, then shifted her gaze to his broad shoulders, slightly slumped from exhaustion. "Didn't you sleep?" Her voice was raspy, barely audible over the crackling wood. "Enough to know you weren't planning on using that paring knife on me in the middle of the night," Caleb replied without looking back. He poured the coffee into 2 tin mugs and set one on the table near her. "Drink up. Coffee out here ain't exactly Manhattan grade, but it'll sharpen you up for whatever's coming next." Elena sat up slowly, clutching the blanket to her chest. She looked at the steaming mug, then at the small bag tucked against her pillow. She reached inside, unzipped it, and pulled out a rugged black external hard drive. "They aren't just looking for me," she said, her thumb tracing the plastic casing. "They're after this. Thomas Sterling can replace a wife, but he can't afford to lose the financial records on this drive. It's a hit list of judges, congressmen, and county cops who took kickbacks to look the other way while he dumped chemical waste into the Powder River." Caleb stopped slicing beef jerky and turned to her. The corruption didn't surprise him, but her choice to talk did. "Why tell me now? Last night you looked ready to slit my throat if I breathed too loud." Elena looked down at her coffee. "Because last night you could have handed me over. You could have taken a massive payday and kept this ranch out of the line of fire, but you chose to stand in front of their guns instead. In New York, they taught me that trust is a high-end luxury, but out here, I guess I got nothing left to lose." Talib walked over and sat in the chair opposite her. "Trust in Wyoming isn't a luxury, it's a survival tool. If you bet on the wrong horse, the snow will bury you before the sun goes down." For the next 2 days, a bomb cyclone completely shut down the ranch. Snow drifted as high as the windows, turning the cabin into a lone island in a white ocean. In those cramped quarters, the lines between 2 strangers began to blur. Since Elena was still weak, Caleb handled the heavy lifting. He taught her how to keep the fire going and how to use dry straw as boot liners for insulation. Physical contact became frequent and natural. Once, when Elena reached for a kettle on a high shelf and nearly slipped on the slick floor, Caleb was there in a heartbeat. He caught her by the waist, pulling her flush against him. In that moment, Elena felt the heat radiating from his body, the scent of pine and leather enveloping her. Caleb's face was inches away, his eyes as dark as an old-growth forest at night. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not from fear, but from a strange electricity racing down her spine. Caleb glanced at her parted lips, his hands tightening slightly on her waist before he politely let go. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice low and vibrating. "A fallout here could keep you bedridden for a week." That evening, to break the heavy silence, Caleb pulled an old phonograph and some scratched vinyl from a trunk. The sound of old-school jazz filled the room, smoky and full of nostalgia. "A New York socialite probably thinks this scratchy stuff is trash," Caleb said, leaning against the wall, fiddling with an unlit pipe. Elena stood up, the oversized flannel making her look small, yet giving her a strange allure. She stepped into the center of the room, her shoulders swaying slightly to the rhythm. "Actually, it's perfect. It's more real than any gala at the plaza." She stepped toward him, extending a hand. "Care to dance, Mr. Walker?" Caleb hesitated. How long had it been since he'd danced? How long since he'd touched a woman for something other than first aid? He started to decline, but the pleading look in her eyes and her rare smile stopped him. He placed his massive hand in hers. They swayed slowly in the small room by the flickering firelight. Elena rested her head on Caleb's chest, listening to his steady, solid heartbeat. Caleb rested his hand on her waist, guiding her with awkward but protective steps. In that space, the wind outside seemed to fade away. There was only the scent of Elena's hair and the warmth from the hearth. "Why do you live out here alone?" Elena whispered against his shirt. Caleb was quiet for a long time, their pace slowing. "After I got out of the service, I didn't know how to talk to people who lived in peace anymore. That world is too loud and full of polite bullshit. Out here, I know exactly who my enemies are, the cold, the storms, and the occasional wolf. It's simpler. Aren't you lonely?" "No." "Sah." Caleb looked down at the top of her head, feeling the softness of her hair against his chin. "I used to think I wasn't, right up until I pulled you out of that hellhole the other night." His words made her look up. Their eyes locked, intense, and filled with unspoken hunger. Caleb leaned in, his breath grazing her lips. Elena didn't flinch. She closed her eyes, waiting for something sacred and burning. But just as their lips were about to touch, Aries' alarm whinny echoed from the barn again, shattering the moment. Caleb let go of her instantly, his warrior instincts returning in a flash. He grabbed his tactical light and his rifle. "What is it?" Elena asked, panic written all over her face. "Someone's breaching the barn." "No headlights. They're using night vision or moving in on foot," Caleb said, his voice like a blade. He blew out the candles. "Elena, listen. Sterling didn't just bring cops. He's got his own hired guns. If they make it inside, head for the back door and get to Black Canyon. Don't look back." "No, I'm not leaving you," Elena said firmly, grabbing her laptop in the drive. "If I go, this goes with me. But I want you with me." Caleb didn't answer. He shoved her into the corner of the kitchen where the stone walls were thickest. He opened a small hidden compartment in the wall and pulled out a dusty, old satellite comms unit. "You said you know tech," Caleb said, handing her the device. "Sterling's got the cell towers jammed, but this is an old military band. If you can bridge this to your laptop, you can blast that data straight to the feds in Cheyenne. Don't send it to the locals. They're in Sterling's pocket." Elena nodded, her hands shaking as she opened the laptop. While she typed frantically, Caleb stepped onto the porch, hugging the heavy timber pillars. Out there in the pitch black, 3 shadows were crawling through the snow toward the cabin. Caleb didn't fire immediately. He knew Wyoming law. If he dropped a body without proof of the life-threatening breach, Sterling would use the law to string him up. He needed them to draw first. "Walker, we know she's in there." An unfamiliar voice boomed through a megaphone. "Hand over the drive and the girl, and we'll let you live. We'll even burn your back tax records. Don't die for a woman you haven't even known for 48 hours. Caleb smirked. "My tax returns are spotless, thanks." A burst of submachine gun fire shredded the air, thudding into the log door inches from Caleb's head. He dropped instantly, returning fire with a single, precise rifle shot. A scream tore through the night as one of the shadows went down. Inside, Elena let out a sharp cry as a bullet shattered a window, spraying ceramic shards from a vase. She forced herself to focus, her fingers flying over the keys. Almost there. 80%. 90%. Caleb rolled back inside, reloading. "Elena, is it done?" "Done. The data's out." Elena screamed. "Good." Caleb grabbed her hand, pulling her to the floor just as a smoke grenade hissed into the room. "Now, we're going to show him why you don't mess with a Wyoming vet on his own turf." White smoke began to fill the cabin. Through the haze, Caleb grabbed his leather duster and draped it over Elena's head. He leaned in close, his voice commanding and warm. "From here on out, you ain't anyone's bargaining chip. You're with Caleb Walker now, and I'm seeing this through to the end." Elena squeezed his hand, feeling an absolute sense of protection. Amidst the gunfire and the smoke, what they felt was no longer just a spark, it had hardened into a blood oath. The acrid haze from the smoke grenade began seeping into every crack of the hardwood floor, constricting Elena's throat. Caleb didn't flinch. He yanked an old gas mask from his go bag, strapped it onto her face, and shoved her deep under the heavy marble kitchen island. The gunfire outside cut off abruptly, replaced by a deathly silence, save for the wind whistling through the fresh bullet holes in the timber walls. "Walker, give it up!" Thomas Sterling's voice rang out, this time not through a megaphone, but directly from the front yard. He was here. "I know you've got a satellite uplink, but you think a few bits of data moving through a blizzard are going to save you? In Wyoming, I'm the one who holds the deck." Caleb slammed the last few rounds into his spare mag, his eyes flashing with the sharp glint of an alpha wolf cornered, but ready to rip a throat out. He looked at Elena, his rough hand briefly brushing her cheek through the mask. It was a fleeting gesture, but it carried the weight of a solemn vow. "Stay put. Don't move until I say so." Caleb rolled toward the back door where the snow had drifted into a natural wall. He didn't use the front where they were concentrating their suppressive fire. Instead, he slipped through a gap in the stable, using the darkness and the whiteout to flank their position. Caleb knew this ranch like the back of his hand. He had intentionally dug deep drainage trenches around the barn. Now, buried under the drifts, they were perfect death traps. Ah! A scream tore through the air as the lead merc stepped into a snow-covered hole, his legs snapping instantly. Caleb didn't finish him. He put a round into the tire of the idling pickup, making it roar and then die out. His rifle shots rang out, bone-dry and clinical, each one a grim warning. He didn't aim for heads. He took out shoulders and kneecaps, neutralizing their combat effectiveness while keeping them breathing. For Caleb, the rule of law wasn't a weakness. It was a choice not to become the same piece of work they were. Meanwhile, inside the cabin, Elena wasn't just sitting idle. A laptop flashed a green notification, upload complete. Acknowledged by DOJ office, she let out a breath, but instantly, a shadow shattered the back window and lunged into the room. It was Thomas Sterling. He was clad in an expensive fur coat, his face flushed with pure rage, clutching a silver-plated sidearm. "Where the hell do you think you're going, you little bitch?" Sterling bellowed, leveling the gun at Elena. "The contractor's worth billions. You're gonna trash my career for some no-name ranch hand?" Elena stood up, the shaking gone. She drew herself to her full height, her smoky gray eyes staring down the man she had nearly called husband. "Thomas, you don't get it. Caleb isn't just some ranch hand. He's the only man on this earth you can't buy off. And the data is already gone. The feds are on the way." "You're lying!" Sterling lunged, reaching for her hair. Right then, a dull thud echoed. Caleb burst in from behind like a black whirlwind. He used the butt of his rifle to knock the gun from Sterling's hand, then with a professional takedown, slammed the billionaire onto the glass-strewn floor. "Clock's run out, Sterling," Caleb said, his voice low but carrying a terrifying edge. "The storm's broken, and so is your luck." On the horizon, the dawn began to break, staining the snow-capped peaks pink. At the same time, the thrum of rotors shredded the morning stillness. Two black troopers bearing federal insignias appeared, hovering low over the yard. FBI tactical teams swarmed down, surrounding the mercenaries groaning in the snow. A tall agent stepped into the cabin, flashing his tin. "Caleb Walker? We picked up the distress signal and a financial dump from this location." Caleb let go of Sterling, leaving him for the agents to zip-tie. He stepped over to Elena, who was now completely spent and collapsing into his arms. Caleb held her tight, shielding her from the prying eyes of the crowd and the roar of the birds overhead. "It's over," he whispered in her ear, his kiss on her forehead a testament to their miraculous survival. A few hours later, after Sterling and his crew had been hauled away, the cabin returned to its morning quiet. The last of the agents had cleared out after taking statements. Elena sat at the wooden table nursing a hot coffee Caleb had just brewed. She looked out the window where the snow was already weeping under the warmth of an early spring sun. "What are you going to do now?" she asked, watching Caleb clear the wreckage of the room. Caleb paused, walking over to her. He took her small hands, which were already starting to show the calluses of ranch life. "I'm gonna fix that door, plant some more grass for the herd, and if you're willing, I'm gonna build another room for a family." Elena smiled, happy tears tracing paths down her cheeks. "I don't need a big room. I just need you." Caleb dropped to one knee. Out here in the Wyoming wild, there were no New York neon lights, no empty promises. He took a small length of rope, braided it into a simple ring, and slipped it onto her finger. "Elena Moretti, you saved my soul in the middle of a blizzard. You want to help me build a real life out of these broken pieces?" Elena didn't answer with words. She leaned down and met his lips in a deep kiss tasting of bitter coffee and the sweetness of freedom. The brutal winter had passed, leaving behind on Blackwood Peak not just a lesson in karma, but a love tempered by fire and ice. They stepped out onto the porch, standing side by side as the valley began to bud and bloom. Thomas Sterling might have owned the land, but he could never own the hearts of those who stand for what's right. On the melting snowfields, Caleb and Elena knew that when two honest souls lock hands, no storm can shake them. Their future, much like the Wyoming sky, was wide open and blazing with promise.